Hi, my name is Ann. I'm a teacher. I'm going to be reading Malcolm Little for my beginning reading relatives and other students. The book is written by his daughter Aisha Bass and A.G. Ford. Malcolm Little, the boy who grew up to become Malcolm X. Here is a picture of his parents, and if you can't see the words, just listen. Malcolm was one of the most influential men in American history, but before he became Malcolm X, he was Malcolm Little. Malcolm was born on May the 19th, 1925, in the small Midwestern town of Omaha, Nebraska. He was born into a tight-knit family with parents who not only encouraged his natural curiosity as a boy, but also taught him lessons about discipline, fortitude, and self-determination. Malcolm's father was Earl Little, but there was nothing little about him. Papa Earl was a strong, broad, and tiring man. His smooth, dark skin was as beautiful as the midnight sky. His voice resounded like gentle thunder whenever he spoke. His protection and guidance stretched up and around his family like the great live oak trees in his home state of Georgia. Malcolm's mother was Louise Norton. Louise was born into the island country of Grenada, West Indies. It was a place known as the Spice Island, where the smell of nutmeg and cocoa swirled together in the tropical air. Louise was a bright student who excelled at reading and math. She began asking questions at an early age about the mistreatment of people of color in her hometown. After Louise graduated from school, she left for Montreal, Canada, to join her uncle Edgerton, who was the co-founder of the Marcus Garvey movement. Followers of Garvey believe that all humans are created equal. In Montreal, Louise met the giant gentleman named Earl Little. Both of them had traveled to Montreal, focused on joining the struggle for the freedom and justice. And here's a picture of Malcolm X's parents getting married and him playing around. Earl and Louise soon married. The happy couple moved to rural Midwest and soon became the parents of 7 children: Wilford, Hilda, Filbert, Malcolm, Reginald, Yvonne, and Wesley. Earl and Louise cherished their family, installed in their children values, faith in God, self-love of honesty and integrity, and brotherhood and equality. The little children were happy and romped endlessly around the little house and land in Omaha, Nebraska. Malcolm was the middle child, and Malcolm was different. He was full of questions, a natural leader, and a fun-loving prankster. And along with his brothers and sisters, he was always up to something. You can see now he's playing. And then here's another picture I'm going to read. When Malcolm was 4 years old, something horrifying happened that he would never forget. One night, while the little family was sound asleep, with the percussive hiss hum of crickets song whistle quietly in the darkness, the loud crackle of a blazing fire awakened them. Terror clutched Malcolm's heart as he realized the blaze was consuming their home. Fortunately, Malcolm and his family escaped the raging inferno, and they watched in disbelief as their beloved home burned to the ground. They would later learn that the flames had been set by townspeople who disagreed with their family's beliefs about universal equality and justice. The fire was a sad sign of ignorance and intolerance. Here you can see a picture of his father rebuilding. And then I'm going to read the next couple of pages. But nothing would stop Earl and Louise Little from moving forward. Despite the great loss of their home and belongings, they vowed to rebuild their lives, armed not with material possessions, but instead with optimism and faith. After all, Earl and Louise knew that possessions come and go, but faith, love, and perseverance would sustain them. Earl purchased 6 acres of land in Lansing, Michigan, and set out to build a new home for his family. He would construct it with his own hands from the ground up. Earl built the house nail by nail and brick by brick, only buying a new piece of hardware when he had enough money to pay for it. Papa, Malcolm asked, how come we don't have windows in our house? Earl answered, with total confidence, son, when we can afford the glass, our frames will be filled. He leaned over to look squarely into Malcolm's eyes. All good things begin with a fundamental structure. From that moment on, whenever Malcolm felt that wind blew through the empty window frames, instead of wondering when the glass would come, he would think of his father's unstoppable optimism and faith. It's another picture of his father. Malcolm's fathers would preach about faith, self-reliance, and hard work to throngs of people gathered at local churches and assemblies. The grown-ups in the audience listened intently, their eyes fixed on Earl, their ears on his words, and their souls on his message. With arms raised high and eyes piercing with sincerity, Earl Little stirred the deepest parts of their beings. Malcolm felt the electricity in the room as the dignity and self-respect of those in attendance would steadily rise. The meetings were charged with the group's collective desire to create their own opportunities to lead better lives. Malcolm's father reminding them that they were not merely descendants of slaves, but their African ancestors built some of the greatest civilizations ever recorded in history, and that they too could stand together to build a bright future for their children. There were lessons in hope and self-determination that Malcolm will grow to love. Malcolm sat with rapt attention as his father's uplifting messages proclaimed freedom, justice, and equality for all. And then this is a picture of Malcolm with his mother. And just as Malcolm found inspiration from his father's speeches, at church, he learned some unexpected lessons from his mother's garden at home. For Malcolm, the enchanted garden of Louise Norton Little was an entire world of its own, where even the most sluggish of ladybugs and the fastest scurrying ants were all equally treated like esteemed and welcome guests at a family Sunday brunch. Here, savvy spiders busily crouched their delicate webs along the foliage, allowing the strong Midwestern sunshine to cast pretty patterned shadows on the soft earth below. Geraniums dotted the fields in the distant peppy pops of pink and purple as the crisp blue sky and lush green fields connected somewhere far out into the horizon. In this sacred gardens, beetles hustled about like hurried businessmen on their way to important meetings, while snails lolled leisurely as if they were on some kind of half-speed permanent vacation. Here, Louise taught her children to love every living creature equally, large or small, pretty or ugly, busy or still, fast or slow, insect or plant. The garden was a testament of true and unconditional brotherhood from the earth on top to the sky. A daily lesson in acceptance and equality. Each living creature had a story, a purpose, a reason for being, and a beauty of its on. Throughout the majestic trees in the garden, Malcolm would also learn about the importance of roots, nature's anchors, the base of every living creature, and through the outspread wings of the chirping birds above, he began to see the power of possibility. Okay, here's some more pictures. And so this special garden became a source of knowledge, a little family sanctuary where lessons came each day, little tiny droplets of sweet morning dew, because Louise knew that the best way to teach a child was to give him or her a chance. She gave each of her children their very own little plot of land in the garden where they would take care of their designated areas like proud and professional mini farmers. Malcolm and his siblings learned to plant, water, trim, till, and harvest the crops, which in turn planted the seeds for hard work and their sense of self-reliance. With their shovels and watering pitchers in hand, they nourished their crops and care for their herbs, fruits, vegetables as they would for any other living creature with intention, dedication, and love. Malcolm's favorite vegetable to grow were peas. He would spend hours in the garden methodically combing through the rows of seedlings and sprouts, his little fingers digging ferociously into the warm, I'll finish reading, but you can see him right there. Warm earth, making sure there were no earthworms squirming around down there. When his mother later served the fresh peas at the dinner table, Malcolm would flash his great big gratitude smile. On one summer day, as Malcolm tended his lot in the garden, out of nowhere a small flurry of color swept through the air. As he stood up to wipe the August sweat from his forehead, Malcolm saw the colossal insect. It was every color of the rainbow, and it flew right by his cheek as to give him the tiniest kiss. Malcolm had never seen anything so pretty. Its paper-thin wings forever winking at the world. Its vibrant colors, each one more beautiful than the next. Do you see that beautiful butterfly, Malcolm? Louise asked her son as the breeze, insects, and flowers also seemed to stop in their cracks to listen to her speak. Well, believe it or not, there are a time was a time when that butterfly thought of itself as ugly, frightened, and all alone. It did not understand the value of its own little life. It had to learn about patience because it had no idea that what the future would hold. It had no develop and mature and blossom. It had to develop and mature and blossom. And now look at it. It's beautiful, proud, smart, and free. Okay, here's another picture of Malcolm and his family. Louise always found the time to instill lessons of good morals and values, even while she was ironing, washing, cooking, and fussing over all seven of her children. While folding fresh laundry, Louise will always unfold a newspaper from another country for her children to read, a window into a world, a way to connect with the rest of humanity, brothers and sisters all across the globe, even though the children would begin at home and their information was one of the greatest gifts they could give to them. She could bake biscuits while discussing the philosophy, sweep the floor while reciting poetry, and teach math while pruning the garden. With one hand, she would tend to the linens, and in the other hand, she would hold an open book, and Malcolm and his siblings would listen on as she enthusiastically taught them one of the alphabets of the five different languages that she spoke fluently. Malcolm especially loved the sounds of the letters in French and hearing the elegant introduction of their sumptuous language, words that to him always sounded like they were somehow dressed up. But most of all, these lessons in language taught young Malcolm that there was a whole wide world far beyond his noisy chickens and green peas. Here's another picture of Malcolm learning. You see, Louise knew the real truth about words. She knew that they were more than just a jumble of letters all lined up in perfect rows. She showed him the magic within the words. She knew that each word was actually a powerful building block, a tiny gift of meaning that could bring ideas to life. She taught young Malcolm how to appreciate the dictionary and expose him to the world of books in each volume. Ideas and inspiration mingled like savory flavors in a Spice Island stew that Malcolm couldn't wait to taste. Louise knew that words had the power to move people, to make them laugh, cry, feel, and think. But most important, she knew that more words you learn, the better you could communicate, and the more in life you would be create. The more in life you could create. She firmly believed that knowledge acquired today would transform into wisdom tomorrow. So here's some more pictures. One sunny afternoon after school, when the air was still warm from the day and the chores were done, Malcolm loved to go fishing with his friend Big Boy. The two of them would stand over the stream like a pair of kings surveying the empire. They stood quietly, eagerly waiting for their fishing lines to move, for even just a hint of ripple in the stillness of the glistening water. Sometimes they would stand there for hours watching the stream as if nothing else mattered. They would scratch their heads and exchange looks that said, what could we possibly be doing wrong? Malcolm and Big Boy knew that if they wanted results, they were going to have to come up with a clever way of catching the fish. What were they not thinking of? Malcolm would stretch his head, squinting through the sunshine, and mull it over with Big Boy, both of them trying to come up with a better way to attract fish. Okay, so here's some more pictures. Then one day on the bridge, while their lives were still, Malcolm felt a rumble in his belly. They thought of the delicious supper that was waiting for him at home crept into his mind. Freshly baked biscuits, herb roasted chicken, and medley of steamed vegetables from the garden, and a homemade apple pie that churned vanilla ice cream. Malcolm imagined the aromas that would fill in the little house at dusk. Malcolm imagined what would fill the little house at dusk, and then suddenly it hit him. They needed butter baked, just like the aromas of dinner brought him and his siblings running to the table. Malcolm and Big Boy needed to lure the fish to come swimming to their lines. Their plastic earthworms obviously weren't cutting it. The next day, before Malcolm cast his fishing rod into the stream, he pulled a handful of breadcrumbs from his pocket and hurled them into the water, where they landed like raindrops. Soon, enough tiny bubbles appeared around the crumbles, and just like that, little children would come rushing to the dinner table each night, and the fish swarm around to see what treasures Malcolm and Big Boy had to offer. From that day on, the boys caught big, beautiful fish, but more important, Malcolm learned that observation and effort could combine to create desired results. Okay, here's some more pictures. But the innocent world of magical gardens and carefree fishing would be short lived, and Malcolm's life would change forever. The young boy who until now had learned so much from his parents, lost his father Earl to the brute force of racism and the narrow-mindedness of Ku Klux Klan members and their brethren in the Black Legion. They disagree with Earl and Louise' beliefs in equality, and apparently they also disagree with Earl's right to live in a free society. In fact, they did not seem to think that he had a right to live at all. And it quickly became clear that the hate and fury that was behind the fire that burned the Littles' house down many years ago was now back again, only this time the hate was so strong it took Earl Little away from his family forever. Louise was left on her own to manage the household and the 6 acres of land and fend for her children. She sewed, crocheted, rented out garden space on her land. The oldest 2 children, Wilford and Hilda, set out to help their mother with raising the younger siblings and keeping the little family closer intact. It was that era of the Great Depression and times got harder and harder. Soon, local officials began to assert that Louise was no longer fit to care for her children, and they threatened to take away the family land. The proud, loving mother on whom the children depended was now being taken from them for reasons that no one dared to explain. Here's some more pictures of Malcolm. When it rains, it pours. Malcolm once heard his mother say. Now he understood exactly what she meant. When Louise was taken away, the little children became wards of the state. All of the brothers and sisters were separated. Fortunately, Earl and Louise's good friends welcomed the children with open arms. Some more pictures. Without his parents' guidance, Malcolm became disobedient and required the structure of reform school. But due to his academic adeptness, he was eventually enrolled in Mason Junior High School. When he arrived, he was the only student of color. Malcolm felt like a fish out of water. His brothers and sisters were gone. He missed the sound of his mother's voice. He longed for the passionate speeches his father gave about the teachings of Marcus Garvey. He yearned to hear the gifted orator inspired people to care about history, justice, and equal rights for all mankind. As the only African American student in his new school, Malcolm would have to blaze his own path towards discovering the remaining truths of his own identity. Malcolm tried to cheer himself up. He would conjure up the sweet and satisfying crunch of his mother's oatmeal cookies after a long day at school and the frenetic clucking of the chickens the little family raised and sold, which always sounded like they were arguing. Now the memory of their squabbling provided music to his ears. He thought of how funny Big Boy looked with his pants rolled up, sweat pouring down his cheeks like his own private rain shower. Malcolm desperately missed the lively world of laughter and love that he had grown up in. He thought of his siblings, Wilford, Hilda, Filbert, Reginald, Yvonne, and Wesley, and his newest brother, Robert, the only other people in the world who must have felt exactly as he did. Malcolm wondered if they went to bed each night longing for the same thing that kept him awake, wanting to be together as a family again. Sad, lonely, and confused, the beautiful colors of his life he once knew flattened into an uninspiring shade of muted gray. The grief was stifling, and nothing seemed to help Malcolm. To help, Malcolm was broken. Here's some more pictures. You can see Malcolm sitting in the window. On one overcast morning, Malcolm stood up from his desk chair and walked over to the open window, which was inviting a soft breeze into his room. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath, and when he opened his eyes again, he saw something that he would never forget. Hanging delicately from a small twig on a giant evergreen tree was a cocoon, something Louise had shown him one day in the garden. You see that peculiar little thing, Malcolm? Well, it's actually a casting spun of silk, a protected covering for the creature that lives inside until it's mature enough to fly out into the world. And just then, with one tiny wing at a time, a magnificent butterfly came, half fluttering, half stumbling out. It was in flight for the very first time and set free from his home alone and finally face to face with the entire universe. When Malcolm saw that butterfly, that familiar symbol of freedom and transformation, he remembered who he was and where he was from. He remembered his own cocoon, the safe the safe haven where his lessons and values came like nourishment each day. With his eyes fixed, he followed the path of the butterfly flying away. At first it seemed uncertain, perhaps confused, but its new life outside of the safe little shell. But in time, it began to take flight, soaring through the world around it, bringing joy and color everywhere. Here's another picture. The soaring butterfly gently opened Malcolm's heart to feel joy again. Standing there on his own 2 feet, he felt his roots reaching down into the earth, gripping the soil and providing the strength he needed to awaken the dormant parts of his identity. He would use the sharpness of his mind to overcome the heaviness of his heart. He would replace sadness with smarts and hardships with hard work at school. And just like that butterfly, Malcolm was ready to soar. But his resolve would soon be tested. One morning, the English teacher, Mr. Ostrowski, asked him what he wanted to be when he grew up. Malcolm, who was sitting straight up in his chair, proudly announced that he wanted to be a lawyer. His grades were certainly high enough to set him on the path, but his teacher did not believe that African Americans would have high expectations for themselves or to aspire to excel. So he did not believe people like Malcolm should dream, hope, plan, and succeed. But Malcolm was now old enough to understand Mr. Ostrowski was terribly wrong. And just as nothing has ever stopped Malcolm learned how to rise up with his same bold determination that made his father a family hero. He had good ideas and good friends at school, and the can-do attitude to make something of that promising combination. Whenever Malcolm would tell a story or a joke, the kids will all gather around, their eyes fixed on the harass, um, charismatic boy who was clearly different from them, but someone whom they adored and respected just the same. The little boy who had lost so much, but now ready to face the world. Here's some more pictures. And then one day, something extraordinary happened. Malcolm Little, the boy who was raised on the vision of freedom and justice, was elected class president by the students in his seventh grade class. And when they looked at Malcolm, they no longer saw a mournful child lost in the world. Now they saw a smart, insightful, charming winner. They voted for a leader who believed in equality and who radiated optimism, and their open-mindedness symbolized hope for generations to come. Malcolm may have lost his family, but he never lost the values for which the little family stood. For the rest of his life, whenever doubt, sadness, fear, or pain would come creeping into his thoughts, he would firmly hold on to one constant force that always gave true meaning to his family life: love. I hope you enjoyed this story, and I will try to be reading a little bit more on my YouTube station. Goodbye.